Even here in the United States, of course, all around the world, from Indonesia to London, we're seeing huge, massive protest. And we want to talk a little bit more about this global uprising in solidarity with the Palestinian people by welcoming here to the show once again, Layan Fuleihan, who is the education director at the People's Forum and an editor at 1804 Books. Layan, thank you so much for coming back here to the show.
Thanks so much for having me back.
Well, the honor is all ours. And when we spoke, it was just before the November 4th events in Washington, D.C. that I'm sure many people saw. And I know there's been some days of protests after. So I'll just ask, how did it go on November 4th? And what do you think it says about the state of where things are concerning solidarity with the Palestinian people?
Wow. Well, November 4 went incredibly. There were hundreds of thousands of people coming from across the country. We knew ahead of time that people were coming from all around the country, but actually to see it happen in real life was so incredible. At least 300,000 people were there in DC in person that day. I think that's actually a conservative estimate. We've been studying the aerial footage. There must be more than that. And people really came because with the energy and with the high spirit, it was really a demonstration of the urgency, the strong will, the mood of the public opinion that is right now very much with Palestine. We've been talking over the past couple of weeks about how public consciousness is really rapidly changing, and how the White House has been unable to manufacture a narrative that would keep Israel as the main, point of sympathy for the American public. And we saw in Washington, D.C., this was an organic movement. These were grassroots organizations that made the call, and people came in the hundreds of thousands. People came on flights. There were talk of flights that were full of people who were coming to the protest. It was really unprecedented, and I think really marked a shift in not only in consciousness, but in the strength of the movement for Palestine against U.S.-backed war, and it's marking a new era in American politics.
And, Layan, we've seen a lot of complaints by various institutions that are involved in heavy Israel lobbying, such as the ADL, for example, which of course masquerades as this civil rights organization, when in fact it's quite the opposite of that. It's like a pro-segregation organization. But the reason I raise it is to say that there's been this big concern about, this generational divide that's taking place, and the fact that, we're it's not even left and right anymore. We're losing younger people. You see it among them. You see it among Republicans in Congress that want to shut down TikTok because they say that Free Palestine is trending significantly more than I stand with Israel, which speaks also to something very generational. And then, of course, polls show it as well. And I'm curious if that is what is reflected with what you see in the streets. I mean, I'm not there with you guys, but I do see these videos. Of course, it's people of all ages, but there does seem to be, from the polls you see to what you see on the ground, there does seem to be this overwhelming shift among younger people when it comes to being active around the issue of a free Palestine, especially this time around. And I'm curious if you can speak a bit to that about as somebody who's organizing and is on the ground during these massive rallies.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's the demographic of people that's out is really impressive. It is a lot of the younger generation. I mean, it's a very multi-generational group at every single mobilization that I've been to. But what has marked this moment is, like you say, the participation of the young generation, and from all backgrounds. People in the young generation have witnessed crisis after crisis, have been born in an era of war, and haven't known a time when the United States was not at war at some point, whether it's a proxy war or whether it's an ongoing war, whether it's a hidden war or an open war. And they've had enough, and they're very clear about it. Actually, last week on November 9, which was the first call for a global shutdown for Palestine in New York City, over 100 high schools walked out, and the streets were full of young, high school, even younger sometimes aged children and youth who were out of their own accord. They were making their own political statement. No one was telling them this is what you need to do. People were actually, they organized their peers, they organized fellow students and classmates, and they went out, and not only did they participate, they led chants, they spoke, they clearly expressed how they are not okay with this being carried out in their name. They want to change the future direction of this country, of the foreign policy that the U.S. is carrying out, and they want to have a participation in this, and they recognize that as their right, and they're outside exercising that.
Well, I think that's, a critical point, because I think one of the key aspects of, what people are wondering is the possibility of will this continue? Will there continue to be a wave of protest here in the United States? I mean, of course, around the world. But I'm curious your thoughts about that, Layan, in terms of both what's planned and, whether or not it seems that there is momentum to carry this forward.
There's definitely momentum. I mean, there hasn't been a day where there haven't been massive mobilizations, and the tactics are also changing. We are seeing disruptions, expressions of solidarity. We're seeing people disrupt businesses or offices that have a hand in moving the money from this country to the hands of the Zionists in Israel, who are carrying out this genocide in real time. There's a diversifying methods of building the movement, of expressing the political will of the people, and there's an exponential growth, I would say, in the level of participation because of that diversification. So we had November 9, which was the first call to shut it down for Palestine. This is a diffuse call for people to take action wherever they are, to take initiative, to have the courage to organize in their own context. I think that November 4 expressed the fact that the people have confidence. It helped give confidence to those who maybe haven't experienced being part of a collective movement that's so strong before. It really repudiated the fear tactics and the attempts at repression that had been imposed from all levels of the US government, state governments, capitalist media. It really changed the fact. It put the Zionist narrative on the defensive, not the offensive. And that really empowers a lot of people, because that's something that was done by the people. We can't underestimate the impact of mass mobilization. It has not only changed discourse, but it's making an actual impact on what the ability of the US government to maneuver. The White House has been backed into a corner. It doesn't really know what to do at this point. It doesn't have confidence in Israel's ability to win the war quickly. And the longer it takes, the more outrage there is, the more disruption there will be to daily life and to the all-important economic structures and functioning of this country. Number 9 was a first call to shut it down, but there had been mobilizations and actions before and after every single day. We are building, again, for tomorrow, another call to shut it down for Palestine, which will be even bigger. It is international. On November 9, we counted over 600 actions, but that's only what we could count. I'm sure there was at least double, if not more, because of our inability to actually count everything, because people are acting of their own accord and in their own ways. November 17 will be even bigger. We're mobilizing now even more sectors of society. We've made a call for small and local businesses to close their doors for at least some hours, if not the full day, on November 17. This is a tactic that's reminiscent of the general strikes that have been called throughout the history of Palestinian popular resistance. And it's happened across the world in other contexts as well. And it's very organically being able to happen here again in the United States. There's going to be actions again at offices, more mobilizations. We saw today a shutdown of a major bridge in the Bay Area, very impressive from organizers out in the Bay Area. So the momentum is really growing. And I don't see it letting up anytime soon. I think that people are gaining the experience to see that when we're organized, when we take action, the inevitability of U.S. imperialism and of the Zionist occupation comes into question. Just like the previous guest was saying, I think the spirit right now is recognizing that we do have the possibility to make change and to demand a change in direction and that these structures, these realities, this genocide is not something that we're going to accept, and we do have a role in making sure that it ends. It's not just a symbolic gesture; it is having an actual concrete impact.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's really beautiful. I just really quickly wondering, Layan, if you could, and this is not to discourage anyone, but there is obviously a backlash, as there always is, against any mass mobilization of people against something as serious and huge as U.S. imperialism. And so I'm just curious, what is some of that backlash? What does it look like? And how is it being countered?
Sure. I mean, always there's backlash. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes it's nice to take a look at the backlash and see it as proof of the efficacy of this and the strength of the movement, in fact. We've seen plenty of backlash since the beginning, since even before October 7th. Like you said, there's many, like there's many lobby groups and institutions that really push to demonize and repress the anti-Zionist movement. That's something that has been something that everyone who has been struggling for the end of the occupation for a free Palestine have experienced with. But in this period, it definitely increased. We saw the pro-Israel, pro-genocide march that happened in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday. It seemed like somewhat of an attempt to try to counter the success of the National March for a Free Palestine on November 4. Really didn't even come close. In fact, they had to pay people to come attend the march. So, it's showing the weakness, I think, of the pro-genocide voices and forces, in particular in this country. And we've also seen, in particular, towards the People's Forum, there's been another wave of right-wing media attacks on the People's Forum, trying to make some insinuations that, this is some sort of foreign-controlled conspiracy, that the pro-Palestine movement is funded by Chinese interests. Just really absurd conspiracy theories here, not based in reality, and intended to demobilize, to oppress, to strike fear. But I mean, the wave right now, the momentum is not something that can be stopped by these efforts. I mean, these are really very, very puny efforts, if I can say, in the face of a tidal change, and of a movement that is willing to not only take the streets, but to stay in the streets until they see their demands met. This is now a question of humanity versus genocide, and people are choosing a side. And the backlash is not at all making the impact that it would like to make. I'll say one more thing. A lot of backlash has been happening on campuses against students in particular. And, this is something that's been true historically, but students are also turning the tide. We are seeing students mobilize. Campuses are exchanging with each other and are building not only counters to the suspension of groups like SJPs and JVPs, but they're building mass mobilizations. They're refusing and they're continuing their activities on campus, making sure that they maintain their right to freedom of speech and expression of solidarity with Palestine. And so, really, I think the momentum is with the pro-Palestine forces right now, and not with the opposition, the pro-genocide opposition.
Well, Layan, before we let you go, since, this is an educational program and we like to keep our listeners informed, for those who are wondering more about, this tide, where it's going and how they can perhaps be carried along with it, is there somewhere you suggest they look to learn more?
Yes, definitely go to shutitdownforpalestine.org. That's shut it down for the number, not FOR, for Palestine.org. You can see there people are registering actions from around the world there. You can download some toolkits for organizing different sectors of society, and you can get involved with the groups that are making the call, and any group that is endorsing. The initial groups that are making the call are the Palestinian Youth Movement, Answer Coalition, the People's Forum, National Students for Justice in Palestine. But there have been many groups who have joined the call, who have endorsed. And we really encourage everyone to visit the website, get involved in an action, near you, register actions near you, and join the organizations that are going to help keep this movement going, because we're in this for the long term. We want to see not only a stopping, a cessation of the Israeli bombardment and a ceasefire, but we want to see an end to the occupation. And we're confident that we are going to get there.
Mm-hmm. Layan Fuleihan of the People's Forum and 1804 Books, thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you for having me.